I'm Dave Apsley. I'm with Ohio State University Extension, and I've got Jarel Bartig here from the U.S. Forest Service and NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Jarel's going to be talking about the health benefits of woodlands.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jarel Bartig. My background is in landscape ecology and silviculture. I work under a shared USDA position between the U.S. Forest Service and the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And really, my role is to coordinate an interagency forestry team of those agencies in Ohio that have forest management missions. And we're focusing on Southeast Ohio in particular and the restoration of the oak ecosystem. And my husband and I are also woodland owners here in Pike County. So that's where I'm talking to you from today. So health is probably on all of our minds right now as our awareness has shifted to thinking about connections, global connections and cooperation in this unprecedented time that we find ourselves in. And it's different from the usual state of mind and status quo of separation and competition. I'm guessing that just about everybody participating in this webinar most likely feels a connection to woodlands. Many of us know that we feel better when we spend time in our woods, but it's hard to describe what that is to others or to quantify it in any empirical way. Well, science is starting to catch up to our intuition and what we feel to be true. Today, I'm going to be sharing some language that can help us describe this connection to our woods. And I just wanted to say that my starting point for doing this research, and I'm by no means an expert, but my starting point was to read a book called The Nature Fix by Florence Williams. I really want to credit her up front because her work has greatly influenced when I'm beginning to learn about this subject and about many of the things I'm going to say to you today. So I'm planning on covering 3 possible solutions and sharing the science behind them. I'm also going to share some simple techniques for ideas that you can try for yourself and some places to go if you don't own your own woodlands. And I also compiled a list of resources if you want to explore this topic deeper. It's really fascinating. So I'm going to start with talking about what is this connection? The connection between time spent in nature and increased physical and mental well-being is gaining traction. Scientific research and documentation is growing worldwide, and evidence is being accumulated every day. Nature really is good for civilization. Our nervous systems are built to resonate with set points derived from the natural world. Darwin, Tesla, and Einstein all walked in gardens and groves of trees to help them think. Well-being sounds vague, I know, but its impact is very real. Enhancing your well-being can add years to your life. So what's the disconnect? Humans have always had stress in our worlds. We've always had to deal with stress. That hasn't changed, but the kind of stress has, but the way we respond to it has not. So just to share a statistic, in 2008, the World Health Organization reported that now more humans live in urban settings than in rural. Urbanization, of course, has many benefits, but it's also associated with increased levels of mental illness, including anxiety and depression. There are many reasons for this, and they're not well understood, but one aspect is the corresponding decrease in our time in nature. Our higher order cognitive functions, including focused attention, problem solving, inhibition, multitasking, these are all heavily utilized in our modern life, and they draw very heavily on the prefrontal cortex. That's our executive office taskmaster. We don't allow ourselves time to recover, and our mental resiliency as a society is fraying. Mine is too. So right now with COVID-19 and the uncertainty that comes with it, it puts us in this constant state of stress and constant fight or flight mode, further draining our reserves in a time when we need them the most. So I'm going to go over 3 solutions and how they work today. These all come from nature, and I'm going to share the science behind them. I'm going to explain what are they, where you can find them, and how do they help us. So I'm going to start with negative ions. Well, what are these? They're molecules floating in the air, and they're charged with electricity, and they're called either negative ions or anions. They occur as tens of thousands per cubic centimeters in natural environments with well-developed plant life, in particular trees and shrubs. And today I'd say we've got a lot in our atmosphere with all this rain. Negative ionization also occurs whenever there are bodies of moving water. This is created by something called the Leonard effect. And it happens when the greater the kinetic energy with which a body of water crashes into a solid object or disperses up into the air, this separation of electrons from water molecules, and water molecules are electrically neutral, they produce as many positive ions as they do negative, but most of the negative ions stay suspended up in the air until they lose their charge. The positively charged ions rapidly fall back down to the ground or body of water and can go through the cycle again. So when you're in places with less vegetation, with a well-developed tree canopy, that's another source of these negative ions, as long as there's enough water to produce high levels of humidity. And Ohio is good at that. Having a good amount of natural light is also favorable because negative ions are also generated during photosynthesis. So where can we find these negative ions? I've listed some of the places on the earth where you can find them, but I want to focus in particularly on the woodlands of Southeast Ohio. We are in a well-watered world. We're also in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. These are all conducive to the creation of anions, and they're all around us. We just have to go out there and put ourselves in them. So how do these negative ions work? Environments with negative ions have been shown to be effective in reducing states of stress. Studies have shown improved cognitive performance, both in adults and children, especially memory. Studies and experiments also confirm a direct correlation between high negative ionization of an environment and the improvement of a depressive state. Recovery is much quicker after physical exertion, and negative ions also promote antimicrobial activity. So I just did a lot of talking and a lot of defining, so I'm going to take a break right here and see if there's any questions.
So Timbo asked about what was the title of the book again?
It's called The Nature Fix, and it'll be included in the list of resources that we provide with this webinar. Don't feel like you have to write it down. Florence Williams is the author.
It says, curious, can the ions still be present in natural areas that are dry?
Not as much because there's not enough humidity to hold them up in the air.
Do some folks use ionizers to get that effect?
They do. You can actually bring negative ions into your inside office environment as well, and I'll mention that later in the talk.
Great. I think we can roll on then, Jarel.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next possible solution and talk about tree air. So what is tree air? This solution is probably my favorite because it comes directly from the trees themselves. So one term that you might have heard about, it's becoming more and more popular, called Shinrin Yoku, and it means taking in the forest atmosphere or forest bathing. This term was coined by Japan's forestry agency in 1982 as a way to promote well-being in a very overworked population with one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Most of the scientific research that we have today has come out of Japan. But Korea is also a second world leader in this field of research and is doing a lot of its studies as well. And there are also researchers in Europe and in America, but Japan's really been at the forefront of this field of research. So you may remember back in high school ecology, you learned that leaves soak up air pollution and that there's carbon in organic soil that binds pollutants and cleans surface water. We heard about those stories of ecosystem services, but there's so much more going on to the story. So I want to talk a little bit about what's in tree air. something called phytoncides or essential oils or aerosols. Those are all names for these things that trees produce. And when we say that we smell spring, we are really smelling these tree aerosols. The nose is a direct pathway to the brain. Molecules of a certain size that enter through the nose bypass the blood-brain barrier and go straight into our gray matter and into our bloodstream. That's why some pharmaceuticals are administered up the nose. Well, tree aerosols are nature's pharmaceuticals, and we're just beginning to document, appreciate them, and study them. One study that I read in the Central Sierras of California showed more than 700 of these aerosols were documented in one area, but yet very little is known about how each one works. Also in the tree air, there's another smell that everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with. There's a term called geosmin. It causes the mud and the earth smell of gardening or after a rain, and it comes from soil organisms, particularly the Streptomyces bacteria that are key to many of our antibiotics. Geosmin was only recently discovered in 2007, and according to the Royal Society of Chemistry, we as humans can detect it in very small amounts, the equivalent of 7 drops in a swimming pool. Camels can smell geosmin in an oasis miles away. Geosmin is also responsible for the earthy taste of beetroots, the muddiness of some freshwater fish, and can sometimes also be tasted in wine. So tree air, where's the best place to get it? So intact forest ecosystems are the best sources for taking in tree air, but you can still get benefits in parks and backyards where there are trees. Ecosystem services figure now in policy making and planning and are being defined and quantified more and more clearly. But it really seems important that we expand these assessments of services to include health and mental health benefits. We're going to talk more about mental health later in the talk. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how tree air helps. We all know that we feel better after a walk in the woods, but what are some of the ways that we can actually measure improvement in our health when we're doing this? Some examples coming out of the research include lower blood pressure, lower blood sugar, cortisol, known as the primary stress hormone, especially when we're in that fight or flight mode, that's also shown to be lowered when breathing tree air. Cortisol also controls blood sugar, it reduces inflammation, it regulates our metabolism, it helps control blood pressure, and it even assists with our memory. Another really interesting research finding is that our natural killer immune cells increase when we breathe in tree air. These cells protect us from disease agents and can be reliably measured just like our blood pressure. They're a type of white blood cell, and they send self-destruct messages to tumors and virus-infected cells. It's been known for a long time now that factors like stress, aging, and pesticides can reduce your killer immune cell count, at least temporarily. But breathing in tree air can actually increase them. So how long is enough? Studies have shown not only an increase in these cells after spending time out in the woods, but this boost can actually last for days and even months. Further research testing the idea that it's really the phytoncides that are responsible are starting to be borne out. So even just breathing in some of these essential oils from the trees can help you boost your killer T cells.
Can you get the effects from non-tree plants?
I didn't read any research talking about aerosols that are put out by non-tree plants, so I can't really answer that question. But the geosmin that I talked about and some of the properties in soil, that's also going up into that tree air and is helping in addition to the essential oils put out by the trees.
And then the next question is, has there been any exploration of the percentage of tree air in gardens?
I can't quote statistics, but I know research is looking at tree air in different settings. I mentioned earlier that intact forest ecosystems that's the best source for getting the most you can out of tree air, but there's still benefit depending on how many trees are in any setting. And so you might go to an arboretum in a city park or a garden and still get some benefit. And they're trying to quantify what those differences are. So
And then,
it's all good. Something's better than nothing.
how do they distinguish this effect to trees and not other vascular plants? Is a question from Carrie.
So one of the research projects they did, and this is again coming out of Japan, because there's a lot of things to untangle when you're out in the environment. They want to know, because just feeling better can also make your immune system. So they actually took some of these tree essential oils and did a focus study to see if people's killer T cells would raise just by breathing them in, like in a laboratory setting. And so they can show with research that there is direct correlation, but that's not to say that other things aren't also helping raise the killer T cells. But definitely, yes, the essential oils from trees do it.
Okay, and then Bernadette asked the question, so the higher the humidity, the higher the ions, correct?
Correct. It's easier for those charged molecules to stay up in the air.
Okay, I think we're caught up. So if you want to keep rolling, that'd be great.
Okay. So the last solution I want to talk about is spending time in nature. And when we spend time out in nature and out on the landscape, we engage three major brain networks when we're walking across a natural landscape. We have that executive function network that we talked about earlier, that task focus network. We have a spatial network that helps orient us to our surroundings. But then we have this thing called the default network that is more active when we are passively resting or free ranging across the landscape, daydreaming and goal setting. This network is responsible for empathy, creativity, and insight. And the process is most active when we're not focused on a goal-oriented task and allowing ourselves and the executive office of our brain to actually rest and restore itself. The default network also can have a darker side and can lead to something called rumination, which I'll talk about again later, but I think we all know what it means to ruminate. It can be a maladaptive pattern of self-reference thought that can lead to depression and other mental illness. And if we get stuck in this mode and we don't move over to that default network, our mental wellness can go down, and nature can help be the distraction for this. So talking about time in nature and where can we go to give this executive office in our brains a rest and restore, we do this anytime we spend time in a natural setting, walking in our woods, taking in the view of a beautiful landscape, putting our hands in the earth as we garden. Parks, water, even art can not only benefit us, but we actually require this experience to be well. So even when people talk about being inside in the office and whether they have a window or not, natural sunlight or not, all that is connected to whether we can stay well. So spending time in nature, how does it work? We're just now starting to account for these psychological ecosystem services, I'll call them. Scientists are figuring out what key characteristics of the environment, duration, frequency, and types of nature experiences that generate mental health benefits. Being in our woods helps relax us out of that fight or flight state that comes from constant stress and worry. We've already talked about studies that have shown an increase in focus and memory, and we know from our own experience that we just feel better when we're out in the woods. I also want to mention a couple more findings as additional food for thought when we think about this resource. I want to come back to that idea of rumination that I was talking about. One study looked at it, and it's a prolonged and often unhealthy focus on the causes and consequences of emotions. It's most often negative, self-relational emotions, and we can kind of get stuck in this negative feedback loop. And it takes distractions to break this loop and help us be well. One of the distractions, some distractions can be damaging, but one can be spending time walking in the woods or being out in nature. It helps us pull out of this feedback loop and feel better. Another study that I looked at, you'll see on my slide, I have a star where it says increase awe. Well, what am I talking about here? We all know that when we look up at the stars or out at the Grand Canyon, this can inspire a profound sense of awe. It's often accompanied by an awareness of something larger than ourselves. There's new research now coming from UC Berkeley and UC Irvine suggesting that this experience of awe actually prompts us to act more benevolently toward others. Awe can actually help make the world a better place. And the last bullet I have on that slide, creativity. What about it? Couldn't we use all more of it? Another research study I read about showed results where 4 days of immersion in nature increases performance on a creativity problem-solving task by a full 50%. So time in nature, how long? Time's really subjective, and I mentioned earlier that the effects of true air breathing can be lasting and that the research is still unraveling just how long. But I was really surprised to learn that there does seem to be a clear number when it comes to time in nature. I wasn't expecting to hear that. I just figured you need to get as much as you can. But I read a study of 20,000 people led by a team out of the European Center for Environment and Human Health at the University of Exeter. They found that people who spent 2 hours a week in green spaces, either all at once or spaced out over several visits, were more likely to report good health and mental well-being than those that don't. And they even compared folks that spent time walking outside, but they were in urban settings, and they did not get the same benefits. And the study looked at really this threshold of time, and they found it really mattered, 2 hours or more. And this is really a realistic target for most people, given that you can even spread it out over an entire week and still get benefit. So here's just some simple ideas you can try to boost your health and your well-being. And I thought of another time-referenced research paper that I read, and it talked about a walk in the woods for an hour and a half. And that's enough to receive the maximum benefit of all the things we've talked about today, both physical and mental. But sometimes walking in the woods by yourself, that's one thing, but what if you have family members with you? Sometimes you need to find activities you can do while you're out in the woods, especially if you've got small children or you're trying to encourage family members or friends to give the practice a try. It's one thing to say, I feel better when I'm in the woods, but how do you explain that to others? So one idea that I saw that I thought was interesting is that you could spontaneously create a mandala out of natural materials that you find around you. I'm showing you a couple pictures of what those look like. You could try your hand at nature journaling while sitting at the base of a favorite tree, or really you don't have to do anything. Just get out there, sit and breathe. I think right now is an amazing time to be doing this because humanity has been on pause and everything has slowed down and gotten quiet. Nature has responded in amazing ways. I don't know if you guys have been hearing these reports, but things like dolphins showing up in the canals of Venice, tigers walking down village streets, sea turtles hatching on beaches that were once too busy with people. I'm kind of wondering what's happening right here in Southeast Ohio. Like the whippoorwills just showed up again, and maybe we're going to have more because traffic is down and less are likely to be killed as they hunt for moths along roadsides. Who knows? What if we stopped and listened as a population more often? I wonder what we'd experience. So I captured one more technique that you might want to try, and this one is really aimed at boosting your creativity. It's a meditation technique, so before you say no way, give me a chance to explain. This is, it's called open monitoring meditation, and it's different from the meditation that most people think about where you focus really intently on something. This type of meditation focuses on the feelings, thoughts, or sensations that are currently present in one's body. There's actually two types of open monitoring meditation, an internal type and an external type. I chose the external open monitoring type because it actually works with the sounds, smells, colors, and other perceptions of one's immediate environment. And it would be a great way to experience your woods. The goal is just to sit quietly, pay close attention to where your mind travels, just sit back and observe your mental processes, and become aware of the types and the qualities of thoughts and how your thoughts create changes in your body and in your emotions. You just follow your thoughts without judgment or reaction. You stay completely present in each moment of your experience in nature. And who knows what that could be? You could be breathing in tree air, you could be hearing a bird, you could be seeing the flutter of wind through leaves. You just sit and you observe these sensations around you and how you feel. That's meditation, and you're going to get the benefit. And to get yourself started, a simple way is to just sit quietly, breathe in for 7 counts, hold the breath for 5 counts, and then release. We have a lot of rain too, so I came up with some other things you could do. And if you want some other ideas that are easy, family-friendly activities for enjoying the outdoors, I included a link to this joint collaboration between the Ad Council and the Forest Service called Discover the Forest. Another thing you could do is sit under a tree and read the iconic Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax. This is a story about a forest creature who shares the enduring power of hope. This is something we could all use a little of right now. Planting a garden is another good way to connect with the earth and spend time outside. You'll benefit from creating a more robust microbiome in your body through exposing yourself to the bacteria in the soil that we talked about. And if you have to be inside doing Zoom calls like we're doing today, you can also do things to design your inside environment to be more supportive. You can add negative ions to counteract your electronics by doing things like adding a salt lamp, a water fountain, some plants, or I read that burning beeswax candles also produces negative ions. I also wanted to point out that all the images I used in my talk today are beautiful places you can find in Southeast Ohio, and we're including some links to some public lands that you can go, state forests, natural areas, and Ohio's only national forest, the Wayne National Forest. And then I have a couple slides full of a list I compiled of some books and some other links that will lead you to really a vast body of research and information out there. You won't be bored if you decide you think this is interesting and start reading it. It's very addictive and hard to stop. So we'll make sure that you have this, and at the top of my list is that book I mentioned, The Nature Fix by Florence Williams. And with that, I hope everyone stays healthy, and I want to leave you with this very apropos quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I really appreciate everybody's time, attention, and all the thoughtful questions.
Jarel, it's Jamie. I'm curious if you were going to recommend, like, if we were going to read one book, like on forest bathing or the general topic, like, where would you start?
Tell me when I can go to my first resource slide.
You can. She's
okay.
got them on. Mm-hmm.
So what I would start with is The Nature Fix. It's a really comprehensive coverage of not just tree air breathing, but a lot of these ideas I talked about today. And then if you're really interested in tree air breathing and forest medicine, I included the forest medicine book, and both of these are at the top of the slide. And really, if you just get on the internet and start Googling this, you will find a lot of research papers that are readily available and are just really interesting to read. There's a lot of information out there, and it's only growing.
Well, Jarel, thanks. It was a very interesting topic for me. A lot of it was new to me. I have read the Richard Louv book, and it's fascinating to see how that affects children as well. But we really appreciate all the work you did. Obviously put a lot of work into this topic, and we had a total of about 52 or 53 people on at the peak. So thanks again. So Jarel, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just looking outside my window. I'm thinking we could all take a break and get plenty of negative ions. No problem.
Absolutely. And it is if you can stay halfway dry and not be miserable, it is wonderful to be out in the rain.
Perk yourself up to hear the next presentation.
All right. Well, thanks so much. And we'll see folks at 1 p.m.
Thanks, everybody.